Hello and welcome to 0n1ydan5. This is unfortunately the final episode, and we are very honoured to have Emma Pickering from Refuge to come talk to us around what her team does, where this money that you've all kindly donated actually goes, and how it actually helps real people. So, without further ado, welcome, Emma.
Hi, Dan. Thank you for having me today.
No, the pleasure's all mine. Thank you for doing this. So I guess first, if you'd like to kind of introduce yourself and
Yep.
what your team does at Refuge, that'd be great. Thank you.
Thanks. So I oversee the Tech and Economic Service at Refuge. So my role is to support the team, develop the strategy, make sure we meet our strategic objectives, make sure that we have a service that's functioning for our survivors. I raise awareness, I attend external meetings, look at income generation to make sure that we can sustain the team and continue to offer support to survivors. And do lots of work around media and comms as well. So looking at that, raising awareness on a wider scale. And then my team, we support survivors directly who are facing complex tech and economic concerns. So just to break that down for people who are thinking, what does that mean? That means that any survivor that comes through our services or the National Domestic Abuse Helpline that are raising any concerns around being tracked, monitored, located via technology, worried about their online financial accounts, worried about fraud, coerced debts, we make sure that we can offer them direct support to make sure that we can help them regain financial independence, make sure they can use their technology safely, help them build evidence if a perpetrator has been stalking and monitoring them via technology, if they want to seek police convictions, criminal convictions, and really are just led by the survivors what they need from us.
Yeah, thank you for that. So am I guessing, I'm totally guessing that you don't have probably a day in a life that's average. I'm sure that this comes with huge amounts of complexity. It sounds very personal, but would you be able to give any kind of rough, is there any kind of similarities from day to day? You don't have to go into specifics, obviously, because the survivors are much keeping their privacy, I'm sure, is very important. But if you can just give us a rough idea of the links you go to, that'd be great. Thanks.
Of course. So we've all got individual roles and responsibilities. Some people in the team have very similar roles. So they're what known as tech leads. So they're supporting survivors around tech concerns. We've got economic leads as well. And then we've got managers, project leads, training leads, a digital lead that works on our website content, our podcasts, our newsletters. But a day in the life can vary, so it can look from offering survivors direct support, so doing a tech assessment with them, building a resource package for them, building guides for them, looking at research, so finding out what the latest tech concerns might be. We could purchase some technology, so we could be running a report. We review guides, apps that are on the market, so we can develop a guide around that particular safety app. We get a lot of requests from police, commissioners, etc., to use particular safety apps. So we make sure we run like a comprehensive review of what the app would look like. It could also be putting content together for our newsletter, recording for our podcast. It could be meeting external agencies. It could be delivering training, either internally, externally. It could be meeting with banks. So it can really vary across the week. So that you're right, there isn't a typical average day.
I mean, that's a phenomenal amount of work to cover, right? Like, I'm trying to apply this to my own world in kind of cybersecurity for a company, and it sounds like each one of these is like a specialized role in itself. So it must kind of like I'm not sure, do you have any published figures on how much this costs to run and keep these things, or is that information that's kind of private?
It's not necessarily so much private, it's just it varies. So at the moment, we've got quite a sizable team. So that obviously would cost a significant amount of money. You're probably easily looking in like per year to keep us all in a post, probably near something like, I don't know, £800,000. And then you've got all your central management costs as well. So we take support from our IT team, our finance team, and so on. So there's costs attributed there as well.
Mm-hmm. But well worth it. I think we had Shannon on previously in a previous episode, kind of explaining what she tries to do is in kind of pro bono work in the States, and having people kind of phone her and trying to get them out of that initial situation where it could be incredibly difficult. You could have a partner that's looking at their phone all the time, so actually their method of communication, they have to think around it. And I'm sure you have the same issues, and that's why funding is so important, right? Because you need to have funds to be able to do this kind of specialist work.
Yeah, and sadly, a lot of my time is taken up, and also I've got an economic partnership manager, and our time is taken up with looking at funding opportunities, supporting our fundraising team as well to build packages of impact, kind of present to funders, donors. So a lot of time is dedicated to that rather than doing the doing sometimes, which feels difficult. We're not statutory funded. So that's also an issue as well. So each year our funding can look very different, and it's dependent on what the funder kind of gives us. So then our projects and our deliverables could potentially change year on year.
Yeah, interesting. So I guess now we're kind of like, is there any kind of pattern that you see, not so much in victims, because I'm a firm believer that everybody really can be a victim to this. I've seen there's various myths on survivors, which are completely unfounded. This can really happen to everyone. My personal experience is, I tend to get very worried if I see things are perfect, because that's how domestic abuse entered into my world. It wasn't done to anyone in my family, but there was a couple that had a perfect life on paper, and one day they appeared, and it clearly wasn't perfect. So I think, is there anything in particular around, like, so I think Shannon spoke around, she can kind of suss people from day one, like the way that she will challenge people and they will respond. Is there actually anything that you found over here that there's a link between people that basically do this really sick stuff?
So what you're asking is, have we identified particular groups of perpetrators?
Yeah, sorry, that's a much better way for it.
No, we've had a look. Actually, some of our data does show us like perpetrators, like professions, because we collect that data, and the reason we do that is because we need to understand if they are technical, tech savvy, have the ability to control someone's devices, or are connected to people that can do that, or they're in professions where there's high risk. So maybe, I don't know, criminal justice, banks, etc. Other factors we need to consider. And the reality is, it's in absolutely every profession, just as every survivor is in every walk of life. And there isn't particular subgroups that are more impacted than others, and there's not particular perpetrators that are more likely to be a perpetrator than others. So sadly, it's really difficult to necessarily be able to identify because it doesn't work like that.
Yeah, so I guess in that case, it's very difficult to kind of be able to say, like, in previous, you might use profiling, for example, to protect yourself, right? You can't do that in this situation. Therefore, it's quite hard. But is there any kind of initial steps? How would you keep yourself safe, but also try and find out, am I likely to be subject to domestic violence?
I think the domestic abuse and the tech facilitated abuse are two similar things, but slightly separated. Obviously, it is important to have a sense of how your privacy features work, your settings work. That's all important for all of us. But I think we always try and move the emphasis away from it's the perpetrator that's doing harm. So we want to try and flip that narrative to make sure that agencies focus and hone more on the perpetrator. Take away their device for analysis, make sure that you're penalising them because they're the one that's doing wrong, not the survivor. They shouldn't have to come offline and hand over devices and etc. But there are ways in which, if you suspect, and quite often survivors will come to us and say, I suspected that something was wrong because my perpetrator told me he could hear conversations in the home. He knew who I was speaking to. He knew my whereabouts. He was turning up at my location. There were things that felt odd. He was piecing too much information together, and she thought there's no way that you would know all of this unless you had access to email accounts, WhatsApp messages, phone records, location services. It's the only way you would know all of this information. It's not plausible else. And then that led her to be suspicious. And then we would come along and we'd do a tech assessment with her and we'd conduct an analysis of the device and accounts. And then it became quite apparent that actually he has gained access to lots of different accounts and devices, or is monitoring her through home tech, etc., or different accounts. And what we do find with perpetrators is they're never in just one thing. They're always in multiple accounts and devices. So when the survivor comes to us and says, I think it's my WhatsApp account that's a problem, what we find is actually it usually is emails, location, home tech, CCTV. There's a whole multitude of issues. And the children's technology, if there are children involved, is normally always impacted as well.
Yeah, and that's quite insidious, really, if you think about it. They're using somebody's children to kind of get at them. I mean, the whole thing's insidious. I'm not being funny. Like, the whole thing is quite scary, that people in this world would feel entitled that they can ignore somebody's privacy that they might not even know. Let alone, it's bad enough if they were in a relationship or a partnership, but this also works with complete strangers, right? Have you found, in particular, I guess, like, there's a lot of discussion around toxic masculinity at the moment, especially with adolescence, I think, that came out recently on Netflix. I think for some of us, this isn't a new thing, but it's good that it's been kind of highlighted a bit wider.
Yeah.
I guess, have you found an increase in that kind of random hatred kind of linked to the manosphere, or is this actually much more kind of closer to home a lot of the time?
I think it's a bit of both. I think it's definitely wider and societal. I think we are seeing now, and there was a recent study, I don't recall where it came from, apologies, but there was a study that showed that if a young boy was to sign up to TikTok now, it would take 40 minutes on average before his algorithm started to feed him harmful content around women and girls. So that's all it takes for him to start to be exposed to harmful content. And then you can see quite easy how young boys, men, older men can be exposed to harmful content. That narrative of women are harmful, women are a threat, and that's fed to them constantly. And they're exposed to all of that, where it's quite easy for society to then say, and the society that we're living in now, legislation's changing, the world is changing, women's rights are being revoked, we're having more surveillance than we ever have before. So all of that landscape changes, and it creates a situation where that balance becomes even more uneven than it ever has been. And then if you look at from an intimate context, when we talk about legislation and surveillance and monitoring, the legislation protects you from third parties unknown. When it comes to intimate partner, it's almost acceptable that within the home, your partner has some sort of right to monitor you and survey you. And the legislation kind of fails people there. So there's two things there. We're normalising monitoring, we're normalising this tracking of children, monitoring children, we're normalising all this harmful content that young boys are being exposed to. And that was regurgitated down, and this is the world that we're living in now.
Yeah. So I guess...
Sorry, there's a lot to leave you with there.
No, it's great. I was just trying to think of so I think the quote actually comes from Laura Bates' new book on AI and algorithms, but I was trying to remember the title and I couldn't, so I'm sorry for that. But it's a fascinating book, and yes, you're right, how on TikTok, the fact that you're targeted because you're a young boy means that they will already funnel you to that content.
Yeah.
Therefore, it's it's not inevitable that child will be susceptible to those ideas, but without, I guess, any guidance from those around them, without any kind of knowledge that they're on those sites, that's what makes it harder, right? And that's what I fear for is how many on the flip side, how many girls are exposed to content where they then feel that that's the norm.
Yeah.
It's quite scary. So I guess really, and I mean this as a kind of like not, I mean, me personally, but also wider, like how can we all help really to kind of stop this? Is there any kind of ideas or in general that where, like, I think in particular, I think as men we need to do a lot more. But generally, is there anything we can do to help? That if anyone was watching this and they feel that they probably ought to do something, or maybe they're convinced that while they're watching this and they don't know what to do. Sorry, I'm babbling now. I'll give
No,
you.
no, not at all. I think if you suspect that somebody you know is being abused, monitored, tracked, then always try and reach out and link them in with a support service, because it's better to ask and connect them than kind of hope that everything's okay. It's always best to try and give them the options, or say, here's support out there if you ever did need it. Here's a contact that you could be using. We always give survivors safe phones as well to speak to us, because we are, very acutely aware that their phone could be compromised. But this is a kind of really wider scale. It's not just individuals have a responsibility. So it's like bystander intervention, making sure you call out inappropriate behaviour. If you see things online, reporting it, flagging it, not accepting it as the norm, challenging that, and making sure that as individuals we're playing our part. But on a wider societal kind of response, it needs to be legislation needs an overhaul. The government, if they are serious about tackling VOG in this next decade, then they need to be funding services adequately so they can respond to survivors. They need to be looking at prevention programmes with young boys and girls to make sure that we stop normalising this form of abuse as well. We need to make sure that the regulation around Ofcom tackles this work around, we talk about regulation and making sure that we're proactive and we are making sure harmful content isn't being kind of exposed to young people, but we know it still is. So it feels a bit of a disconnect there with we've got this regulation, but is it really working? It's moving at pace. Is it doing what it needs to? And then education campaigns as well. I know that, there's some really great organisations out there that do work in school, college settings, but it seems really ad hoc, and it's not it's a bit of a postcode lottery. And I think it needs to be, the government really need to back that properly. And it needs to be a whole thing where, there's a big training piece around making sure we've got provision in places in schools and colleges for children, young people.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so it sounds like there's a lot of work to do, right? And we all need to do our part in that. Thank you ever so much. It's been really enlightening for me. I know that you've got somewhere to go, so we'll do it there. But thank you so much for your time, and I appreciate we can all appreciate you're incredibly busy. And please, thank you for doing all your work. And I hope to catch up to you soon.
Thank you. Thanks for your time.
And that's the final episode. Thanks ever so much to everybody that's watched. If you'd like to donate, the donation is still around. It's at our 0n1ydan5 YouTube channel, which you're probably watching this on. So if you like what you see, please tip accordingly. All the money goes to Refuge to help things exactly like this. Okay, thank you very much.